Welcome to the Infinite Women podcast. I'm your host, Allison Tyra, and today I'm joined by Anne Foster, a Canada-based writer that people may recognize from her own podcast, Vulgar History. Her new book, Rebel of the Regency, about Caroline of Brunswick, is available to order now, and she's here to tell us about Caroline's daughter, Princess Charlotte. As anyone who's listened to Vulgar History or my own episode about the rise of the Hanoverians to the English throne will know, this is a family with a lot of petty drama, and Charlotte's life is no exception, starting basically from birth.
I would say starting from conception. So my book about Caroline of Brunswick, it's called Rebel of the Regency, and it's coming out next year. And as I was writing it, I got distracted. I don't know. I just really got into the story of Princess Charlotte. I'm like, this is so amazing. This is so interesting. And then it's like, this isn't a book about her. I can't put all of this into my book, but I have all these notes, and I'm like, what can I do with them? I need to let people know how cool she was. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to do this. Since you've done the Hanoverian dynasty on your podcast before, I'm just going to kind of refresh people's memory for where she fits in because I know it's all really convoluted and everybody is called George. But so we're looking at her parents were the who would become George the Fourth. At this point, he's the regent. So like the famous the Regency era. Her dad is the regent. Princess Charlotte, some people might know from the first episode of Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story, which starts with her death. Spoiler, Princess Charlotte. So her parents were the future George the Fourth, and her mother was Caroline of Brunswick, who I wrote my book about. And George the Fourth and Caroline of Brunswick, as far as I told other people, they had sex once on their wedding night, and 9 months later, Charlotte was born. Because they hated each other from first sight, George and Caroline. Um, they spent the whole rest of their lives really trying to get out of this marriage. So Charlotte was born into this. Well, it was a situation where like you need to have an heir to the throne. And I don't know if you got into this in your Hanoverian episode, but so George the Third and Queen Charlotte, who I just really need to emphasize were not as cool as on Bridgerton, nowhere near as cool as on Bridgerton. They had 15 children, but none of those children had legally binding marriages and heirs. So there's kind of this issue of like which is like the whole point. The whole point of becoming the wife of the king and having all these children is to like ensure the succession
Yeah, it's
of your
like you had
family.
one job to do.
And she did the first part of that job, which
No,
is
she,
Queen
she did
Charlotte.
she did her job, but they didn't.
No, well, they didn't because she infantilized them and prevented her daughters from ever getting married and forced them to be her companions. And then because of the various legal things that had been set up by George the Third, because George the Third's brothers kept having like secret marriages to like actresses. And he's like, this, you can't keep secretly marrying actresses. Like, you need to have actual marriages to like princesses. So then he made whatever it's called, it's like the Royal Marriages Act, which said people in line to the throne have to get permission from the monarch to get married. And so what that meant is that George the Fourth and his siblings just started having common law marriages with actresses because they were like, okay, well, I don't want to marry a princess. I just want to like have fun with this cool actress I met. So they had these sort of like, we would call them common law marriages. Like they lived together. Like some of these guys, George and his brothers, had like 10 children together or whatever, but it's not a legal marriage. So there's all these children, but none of them could actually be the heirs because no one in this family had had a legally binding marriage. So George the Fourth eventually agreed to get married. He was the heir to the throne because he was in such debt. And I did some conversions in my book because when you see whatever, it's like 50,000 pounds. I'm like, well, that's like, that must have been a lot then. It's like, oh, this is the equivalent of like $600 million or whatever. It's like he was in such debt just from like redecorating his house and like gambling. So, but they were like, well, if you get married, we'll increase your allowance and that'll help pay off your debts. And that's why he got married. Um, he chose his cousin, Caroline of Brunswick, who he'd never met before because he kind of didn't care who his wife was. He just like, she's like a bank account. She's a line of credit. Just kind of not thinking that she'd be a person. And then she showed up and they're both like, oh, you're horrible. But they couldn't back out of the marriage. Then they got married, had sex once, and that's Charlotte's parents. So she was born almost exactly 9 months after the date of her parents' marriage, um, January 7th, 1796. So, like, there's so much people talk nowadays about like let's return to like the nuclear family or like in my grandparents' age, people didn't used to get divorced and whatever. And it's like, but that didn't mean the marriages were good. That didn't mean right. And like it's very relatable to me. Like I have so many friends who had separated parents. Like she was going back and forth between two households, just like toddlers do today when parents like because George and Caroline separated almost directly after Charlotte was born. They weren't allowed to get divorced for like various like Anglican reasons, but they lived in completely effectively separate cities. Like Caroline was living in Blackheath, which is where Greenwich Park is now. It's technically part of London, but back then it was like its own village. So they never saw each other. And Charlotte would just go back and forth. I think she had like weekends with Caroline and she spent the week with her father. Um, and Caroline could go and visit her daughter sometimes, but George made sure he wasn't in the palace when that happened. Like the two parents never, like it was the most toxic relationship, but they also found the way to co-parent was to just truly never see each other. So she was a little kid going back and forth, which is like really feels contemporary to me to be like split custody with your parents who kind of hate each other. And Charlotte was the only child of the heir to, well, Charlotte was the only legitimate child of the heir to the throne. So she was the next heir to the throne because none of these other 15 brothers or sisters had any legitimate children. So she was it, like, which is wild out of this like huge, all these princes and princesses. It's like, here's the one heir to the throne. It's this one little girl. And it's a girl. And there had been like Queen Anne had been the queen. I guess she would have been like what, like the fourth queen? Because there's like Mary the First, Elizabeth, then William and Mary were together. So she would have been like the fifth queen regnant of England. So it wasn't like unfamiliar, but it was unusual. Anyway, so she grew up and given the personalities of both of her parents, who were both very um outrageous people in different ways, she like obviously developed like a very strong personality. Like she had no chance to not develop a very strong personality because that's what her genetics were. And so the thing about her, she was athletic, especially as a young girl. Like she liked riding horses. She like there's descriptions about her as a kid, like romping around. Like she was there with like, they arranged for her to have playmates and friends who were like the children of other people from the aristocracy, and she's just like charging around. Like she's a tomboy type figure. She was very fond of animals, especially horses, and this was just at odds with what was expected of the heir to the throne, but also of just like a princess and also like a royal and also like an upper class girl of this time. And so from a young age, like my heart goes out to her and people still go through this today, but she was just not the like nice little girl that everyone needed her to be. And she took that in and she felt so bad about it. And she tried to be that nice little girl, but she just wasn't. She was this like kind of wild, passionate, like outdoorsy, athletic person. And she tried so hard to not be. She tried to make that not who she was, but like that's who she was. And my heart kind of breaks for her. Yeah, so like just from what I read about her, like she slid down banisters, she climbed trees, she liked doing like jumping her horse over hurdles. She would ride astride, like with your legs apart instead of in the ladylike way. So she was constantly in trouble with her grandmother, who was Queen Charlotte, who was a very conservative, like Queen Charlotte's whole thing. And I don't know how much you got into this in your Hanoverian episode. It sounds like you focused a lot on the.
Yeah, we stopped at Augusta because it
Okay,
was already
okay.
like
So
an hour and
Queen
a half long. So we had to confine it somehow.
Fair. So I really need everybody to completely separate in your brain the cool Queen Charlotte of Bridgerton story from like actual Queen Charlotte, who was her whole thing was like, I like as a woman, she saw her purpose is to never have an opinion on anything, to never express an opinion on anything, to always be modest, to always be quiet, like to never speak up, to just like sit there and that's why she was chosen to be George's wife, and that's why she did well as that because she just sat there doing and saying absolutely nothing. and being like decades after big, like hoop skirts went out of fashion, she still wore them because she was just like, anyway, she was really, 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 really judgmental of other people, and she wanted everyone to behave how she thought a woman should behave, which was just like quiet and meek and submissive and never having an opinion about anything. And so you can imagine like Princess Charlotte, her namesake is just like, so Charlotte was constantly in trouble. And then also when she was hanging out with her mother would badmouth her. Like there wasn't family therapy at this point. Like there's not, God knows for the Hanoverians in general, there's a lot of generational trauma. So her mother was constantly bad-mouthing her father. Her father was constantly bad-mouthing her mother. And she's just like in the middle of this like little kid, just like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. Um, always forced to take sides between them. So the most constant people in her life were her like governesses. There was like she became very close to them. I think one of them she called her mother or something like that because she was with the governess more than she was with her actual mother. Although her mother, I do want to say, Caroline of Brunswick was obsessed with being a mother. She loved being a mother. She had so much like maternal energy, maternal instincts, but she wasn't allowed to be with her daughter as much as she wanted. So as much as she wanted that relationship, it wasn't happening. And Charlotte wound up getting that mostly from her governesses. She's a sort of little kid who you can picture as just like a little everything I described. So of course she's like a people pleaser. Like she wants to do things that make people happy. So she was in sort of like a child star way. Like they would bring her to dinner parties and she would sing like, a national, like a patriotic song. And everyone's like, oh, isn't she so cute? Like she would be sort of like this little performer. When she was in public, people were like, wow, she's so like, what a great little kid she is. She's so smart. She's so poised. Like, this is great. But she did have a stammer that would, when she was excited or when she was nervous, and she was always nervous around her father because he was a nightmare person and that made him more mad at her. And it's just like, oh, you're going to be heir to the throne. Like, why aren't you? Why are you stammering? And the more you yell at somebody who's stammering, when that's their trigger, then of course she's going to stammer even more. On the one hand, like she's sort of an object, not a person. Like people, she was just sort of handed off from place to place. Like when she was with her mother, like her mother loved her and adored her, but no one was really paying attention to her as a person in the context of like her education. They're all just like, oh yeah, she'll figure that out. So her teachers changed when she was around, I think, 8 or 9 years old. And the new teacher came in and was like, oh no, she can't read or write. Like no one's been teaching her anything, actually. So she was functionally illiterate at age 10, which could like may her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, throughout her whole life had like difficulties with reading and writing. So there could be some sort of inherited like learning disorder or like dyslexia or something. But the fact that no one realized this is just kind of speaks to how no one is really. I think because she was the heir to the throne, the teacher would be like, "Oh, she's so smart. Oh, she's the best student I ever had." But the teacher wasn't actually teaching her anything. They just wanted to make the king happy.
Was there anything where like she didn't want to learn and you can't tell the princess no?
I think that was probably part of it, honestly. Like when she's so powerless in so many parts of her life, like the only place where she could assert herself would probably be among her tutors, right? And just being like, I'm gonna not do that assignment. I'm gonna go climb this tree. I could
Actually,
definitely see that happening.
I could also see if there's this whole like all this pressure on her to be perfect and she knows she's failing, then
Hmm.
not wanting to deal with like not being good at something else, if that makes sense.
So I think that there's a lot. This is somebody who would have really benefited from uh some some real intervention from people who really cared about her, but there was no one in her orbit like that. Again, because she was kept away from her mother so much. Like her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, at this point was like bringing in orphan wards from her neighborhood and like running a school for them to like train them for their future lives. Like Caroline of Brunswick, like knew about childhood education, but like she wasn't in charge of her daughter's education. At one point, her tutor, Mr. Knott, had some sort of breakdown, which I don't know his situation, but Charlotte was apparently told that it was her fault because she wasn't a good enough student.
Because there wasn't enough pressure on her already.
Yeah, so this is like a lot of what we know about her is because she wrote letters to her friend, her best friend, and those letters were retained and still exist. And they read they're so fun. Like you really get a sense of her personality. Like it's almost like reading like a novel. But she wrote at this time to her teacher, I shall labor to recover your health by my industry and wish to please and make you happy. So she's like, I'm going to become a better student and that will cure your illness, your psychological breakdown. So she like so much pressure's on this poor little girl. But she was also, this is the thing, like so much pressure's on her, but she still like couldn't restrain herself from being just a cool, interesting, funny person. Like it just comes out of her, especially like she would hate this probably, that we know so much about her from these personal letters that were never meant to be made public. But she made silly nicknames for all the people around her, which is just really relatable and feels just like a teenager because she's a teenager by this point in my retelling. So the overall supervisor of her education was the Bishop of Exeter. Um, and he would call himself, he's like, I'm the bishop. And she would call him the Great Up, um, making fun of how he would talk and how self-important he was. Apparently, there's times like when he would turn his back, she would imitate his gestures to make the other children. Because she was educated, she had like companions with her who were also being educated. So she was just like class clown, basically.
Speaking of the people around her, there was also a situation where when she was 10, she, for some reason, decided to write her last will and testament. And I just need you to tell us about that because it is weird.
Oh,
I love it.
it is weird and very melodramatic. And it's funny because her father actually, just after Charlotte was born, so her father, George IV, he had various like health issues, but a lot of his health issues I would diagnose as being like panic attack related. Like when he was really upset, he'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm dying." And people then were like, "Here's some leeches because you're dying." But to me, reading it now is just like, I think this man is having like panic attacks. Anyway, when Charlotte was born, he had a panic attack and he thought he was dying and he wrote his last will and testament. He didn't die. So I think just this family trait of just like writing your last will is just kind of like a thing you did. So the various people who are with her. So there's governesses, there's Lady de Clifford was her main governess, and then there's also the assistant governess, Mrs. Campbell. And then there's a third governess, Mrs. Utney, who she called Nibs, don't know why, who she did not like. So when she was 10 years old, for some reason, she wrote her will. And so it read, first, I leave all my best books and all my books to the Reverend Mr. Knott, the man who had the breakdown, but I guess he came back. Secondly, to Mrs. Campbell, my 3 watches and half of my jewels. Thirdly, I beg Mr. Knott whatever money he finds me in possession of to distribute to the poor. I leave with Mr. Knott all my papers which he knows of, and I beg him to burn those he sealed up, which is also a common thing that adults did. Caroline of Brunswick, when she knew she was dying, she burned all of her papers up. Like this is a thing people did. Again, I want to emphasize Princess Charlotte was not dying. She was just being like an Anne of Green Gables sort of melodramatic 10-year-old. So she bequeathed her Bible and her prayer book to the Great Up, and all of her playthings to his daughters. The Dowager Lady de Clifford, her governess, who she liked, would receive the rest of my jewels, except those that are most valuable, and those I beg my mother and father, the Prince and Princess of Wales, to take. Um, anyway, so she continued on. So she suggested that Mr. Knott should be promoted to bishop, and requested that her 2 devoted maids would be paid handsomely. And then, the best part of this whole document, it concludes, nothing to Mrs. Udney for reasons. So the whole will might have just been like her way of kind of showing who she liked and who she didn't like, and like kind of throwing some shade at Mrs. Edney. So it's a hilarious document. It feels very much like something that, yeah, like Anne of Green Gables or somebody would have done, including the part like for reasons. So the will was discovered, and then everybody around her was just kind of like, this is fucked up. Like, what? Why did she write a will? A. And B, why is she saying these like catty things in it? So all the household staff, who all had their own drama, they're all separately blamed. It's like, it's your fault. Like, you were the one who encouraged her to do this. You're the one who encouraged her to do this. So Mrs. Campbell took the fall for all of this. So she was forced to resign. Mr. Knott was also blamed, and he was suspended from duty. So Charlotte often she referred to Mrs. Campbell and Mr. Knott as her adopted parents because those were the men and women who were around her the most. She was obviously really upset because the 2 people who mattered to her most, and I think that's the thing the document showed which people she cared for the most, and that everyone was like the servants are feuding amongst each other, and this document proves she liked them better than others. So the others took that opportunity to like push them out so they could, because if they were her favorite servants, then maybe when she's the queen, she gives them a title or whatever. So people are just kind of always jockeying for position. So, but again, it's like she wrote this funny document, and then out of that, it's like, oh, she lost her two kind of like closest people to her adopted parents. So just this poor little girl. And yet, we do see like she continues on being herself. So as she's getting older, her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, and I won't get into all this because it's complicated, but basically Caroline of Brunswick was investigated for adultery when Charlotte was a teenager. And so George IV um wanted to punish Caroline because he hated her and she hated him. They hated each other. And he knew that access to their daughter was the most important thing to Caroline. So he started this adultery trial partially just to keep Caroline away from Charlotte. So Charlotte was not allowed to visit her mother as much as she wanted. But Caroline kept tabs on her. And Charlotte was able to sort of like secretly get letters to her mother so they could still communicate back and forth. And Caroline, she wrote about how she's just proud that she's staying true to herself and being like a spirited person and not letting them get her down. So Caroline, like, this is the thing. It's like she had her daughter's back, but she just wasn't allowed to be there. Charlotte had complicated feelings towards her mother, but she was loyal to her and she was sympathetic to everything she went through because Charlotte was growing up in this household of like vipers, of just people, servants backstabbing each other, and like the princess and the king and the queen, like everyone, there's all these factions and Charlotte's in the middle of it. And so she knew what they were like. And she knew if those people are against you, then maybe you're kind of like, you don't deserve it. Like these people are against everybody. So she was sympathetic to what her mother was going through. She told a friend, "My mother is bad, but she would not have become as bad as she was if my father had not been infinitely worse." In 1810, she got a new lady in waiting, Lady Charlotte Bury, and this lady in waiting wrote, "I pity her that she is born to be a queen. She would be a much happier if she were a private individual." Like, and this is it because Charlotte was not what this family, what this culture needed the heir to the throne to be like, was just not what she was like. And as much as she tried so hard to be that, but all of her instincts were not that. Like, that's just not who she was. So by now, chronologically, she's 14. She was very sociable. She was very friendly. She loved talking to people from all different walks of life. Like the positive example I always think of is like Princess Diana. Like if Princess Charlotte went to a crowd, like she would hug the babies and she would talk to like the poor people. Like she loved talking to people, no matter who they were, which in this society was like which was very class based and very sort of restrictive. It's like the royals should not be talking to these people, but she just loved, also, she was growing up so isolated. She just loved human contact, frankly. She loved giving presents to her loved ones, which is also sweet, but also sort of sad because she was so desperate for affection and for love. Like she really clung to any friends she was able to find. She also, at this point, puberty was happening and she was developing a figure similar to that of her mother, which is like a very voluptuous figure, like a very like Nicola Coughlan style figure, just like very busty, very short. Um, and this was at odds with her, so she wasn't able to like climb trees as easily or like go horseback ride, like just because of her figure and her shape was changing, and that was making things, it's like she couldn't go running around with a body like that. But also, what's cute for a little kid is maybe when you have like a womanly type figure, it's kind of like people don't really have patience for you to behave in those childish ways when you mature
Well,
physically so young.
well, and I would also assume that there were all of these, particularly for a princess, there's a lot of, well, you're growing up, you know what that means, nothing good,
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then also, as she was becoming a woman, quote unquote, she really resembled her mother, who her father hated. So it was kind of like physically, it looked like her, like psychologically, she had similar traits to her mother. So suddenly it's just like, oh my God, like they kept her apart from her mother, but just like you can't forget Caroline of Brunswick exists when this miniature version of her is around you every day, basically. And that made her father hate her even more.
Is that why he got so, like, not that he was ever not controlling, but he seems to have gotten way worse once she was in her teens?
He absolutely did. And I think part of that is maybe because physically she resembled her mother, and part of that was because she was he started to realize how popular she was. And like the older she got, the more she was appearing in public in parades and stuff. And ever since she was born, like everybody in England loved her. Like there's so many complexities to compare people to like 2025 royals. But if you think about what it must have been like when like Prince William or Prince Harry were first born, like everyone loved Diana. It's like these are Diana's sons. Like the whole country worshipped these kids. So Princess Charlotte was adored. Everybody loved her. She was like the apple of everybody's eye. She was kind of like everyone's little relative. And because she was also so popular and so nice and she would talk to everybody, and her father saw that and everybody hated him and had always hated him and he was really jealous of that. And he's the sort of person who wasn't like, oh well, people like her more than me. Like what's she doing? Maybe I can emulate that. He was like everyone hates me. Like, well, fuck them. Like I'm gonna make them like me. So he just started hiding her away to try to compete because he was jealous of how much attention she got. It's sort of like the vibes are a bit like Cinderella and the evil stepmother or something. You know, it's like, oh, she's younger and prettier. But it's like, yeah, and you're the Prince of Wales and you're an asshole. Like, why are you jealous of this child?
Okay, but I have to point out that this is super repetitious in terms of, again,
Hmm.
anyone who wants to go listen to the Hanoverians Rise to the Throne episode, um, this is a cycle that keeps repeating. We saw it with George the First. I think we saw it with George the Second, and then his son Frederick, who died before he could come to the throne. Like you see this like king being jealous and feeling threatened by his heir
Hmm.
and like feuding with them. You see it over and over again with these people. They are such petty bitches.
They are. And in this instance, I don't like, there's no reason for him to be mad or jealous about this because she was not challenging him in any way. Like, I could maybe if it was like an adult man who's the king and his adult man son, it's like, oh, like, is he going to usurp the throne or whatever? Like, maybe you could see a reason for this, but he's just jealous. It's like, oh, people like her more than me. I hate it. Like, it's just petty. It's just petty for the reason of being petty. His whole thing, he's just like, why doesn't everyone love me? Like he was always George the Fourth his whole life. He's just like, people, why don't people love me? But he never changed who he was or what he did or how he interacted with people. He was just always mad about it.
He never actually asked the question of himself critically. He was just whining about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So he's like, they like her better than me, so I'll just hide her away. That will make them like me better. That made them hate him more, actually.
All right, so it's when she's about 14 that the Regency happens. So as you were saying earlier, and again, as anyone who's seen uh, the Queen Charlotte Bridgerton prequel, like we said, it's not fully accurate, but the major issue of King George III, who's Charlotte's grandfather, had a mental health condition and just was unable to rule for much of his later life. And so his son, Charlotte's father, starts ruling as regent in 1811, which, as you said, that's why this period is known as the Regency. So, how did that change Charlotte's life? Because he was already the heir to the throne. So, what
Hmm.
difference did this make?
So what this meant was that her father had more power than he used to before, and he had wanted to be the regent for quite a while. And so he was so excited when he became the regent. He's like, "Let's throw a big ball to celebrate." And his advisors were like, "You can't throw a big ball to celebrate the fact that your father is incapacitated. That's actually in really poor taste, and also everyone already hates you." So he's like, "But Napoleon had a big coronation. I want to have a thing like." Anyway, he held off a few months on the ball. But so the actual the regency, it began not with a big event like he wanted it to be, but it was just like in a room of his house. He signed some paperwork with a few other men in the room. He didn't allow Charlotte to attend, even though she was next in line to the throne, because he excluded her from everything, but because she was an icon, frankly. She, like, they were on the ground floor of his house, and so she got on her horse and she just rode her horse back and forth past the window of the room where they were signing the paperwork in, to try and like see what's happening, because she's an icon. But yeah, so she was much more popular than he was. Eventually, he was able to throw a ball, and I think technically it was the like, yay, my father's like incapacitated ball. But they timed it with some visiting notable people. It's like, oh, it's a ball to welcome these people. Yeah, these visitors, like totally not just to celebrate the Regency. She was forbidden to attend because that would take attention away from him. Allegedly, when the current King Charles was having his coronation, Kate Middleton, allegedly, was told you can't wear a tiara because that will take too much attention. You have to really dress down. And so she wore sort of like a flower wreath in her hair or something. And I think it's the same sort of like the closest comparison I can think of is maybe Charles and Kate Middleton, or even William and Kate Middleton. It's just like when Kate Middleton shows up, that's what every picture is going to be of. That's what everyone's going to be interested of. That's who everyone's going to talk about afterwards. And so he was like, if Charlotte is at this ball, everyone's going to be excited and they won't notice me. I don't want them to notice me. So she thought that she could go to the ball, but she wasn't able to go to the ball. And as she was becoming a teenager, like other girls of that age, like upper class aristocracy girls who would be sort of on her same level, like they were able to go to balls, with chaperones and stuff, but they were really keeping her, I figure it's called, it's not like the unending nursery, but it's like they kept treating her like a little girl, and she was really pushing back against that a lot from her mid-teens onwards. And so she was just kind of like classic child of divorced parents, just trying to do anything to try to get attention. There's two different political parties, which I tragically had to research for my book, and I'm not going to get into it now because I find it so boring. There's two different political parties, and so she decided with the one her father didn't like, just to bother him, basically. So at a dinner party that she was able to attend, her father insulted the Whigs, which is the party that she was supporting at the time. She burst into tears, which inspired the poet Lord Byron to write a poem about her. So just in terms of her being like a muse and just like some of the people paid attention to, like this is people when she showed up so rarely that when she did, everyone was like really interested in what she was up to and what she was doing.
So her father kind of Streisand affected her, where
Yeah,
he's wanting people to like not pay attention to her, but keeping her away from them is only
yeah.
heightening the mystery and oh my God, she's here.
When she shows up, everyone's so excited, which again is a bit of like Kate Middleton when she like post-cancer treatment, where it's just like when she showed up, suddenly there was so much because she'd been away for so long. So I think a similar sort of thing. So he kept her away from London. So Windsor Castle is where Queen Charlotte lived with her daughters, who she forced to be her companions and wouldn't let them marry. So it was just kind of like Queen Charlotte, these like spinsters or spinster daughters who were all kind of going insane, obviously. Like it's obviously it, Charlotte in her letter, she called this like the grand convent. Like she felt that it was just like this really the also it was just like an unpleasant castle. Like the heating was not good, the insulation was not good. It was really damp and moist. Like she felt she got sick there a lot, Charlotte. So on the odd occasion that she was seen in public, crowds like again, like you were saying, it's like people would cheer for her. Like they used to be like, "Oh, we love Charlotte," but now like she's being kept away, and they knew she's being kept away because the tabloids at this time hated the royals. So there's a lot of like insider gossip in the tabloids, just being like, "Oh, like the George IV is keeping Charlotte kept away." So when she came out, people like rejoiced. Like people were even more happy to see her. Versus when George IV or Queen Charlotte were traveling around in their carriages, people would throw rocks and mud at them. The monarchy not popular at this juncture because of like the American Revolution having lost and like various reasons that I talk about in my book a lot. But everyone hated the royal family except for Charlotte. Like everyone loved her and hated them. And maybe part of why they loved her was because they knew that she was kind of their victim. And so while she's staying in the convent, like getting sick constantly from the like mold and mildew and coldness, she was being spied on by her aunts. She was only able to visit with family members, really. So one of those people was Prince Frederick, who was her uncle, and his wife, Frederica of Prussia. So they had no children, not by choice, just because of health issues. And so they'd filled their house with a zoo, like basically a zoo. Like they had so many animals because Frederica had all this like maternal energy she had to expend somewhere. So there's like parrots, dogs, and monkeys. And Charlotte, who loved horses, she loved animals. Like she loved spending time there. Like they were nice to her. And she got out of this like gothic terror castle of just like insane women. So she was also at this point, she's a teenager and she was boy crazy. This is a new aspect of her personality that truly emerged. similar to her mother, who also had a weakness for men in uniform. So, but because Charlotte wasn't able to socialize much, so the only people that she really had to see were kind of relatives. And so one of her first crushes was on her cousin, a guy who was, so you remember all the princes, they married actresses and had like secret families with them. It's one of the sons of one of those families. So like it is her cousin, but officially it's not her cousin because we don't recognize that marriage of that prince with that actress. This is a guy who is George Fitzclarence. So she had a crush on him. And then later she had a crush on another soldier. It's giving me like Lydia Bennet, in Pride and Prejudice when she goes to like flirt with the soldiers. Like Charlotte just like loved a soldier's uniform on a man. So she then had a crush on a guy called Charles Hess, who she called the Little Lieutenant because she had a nickname for everybody.
She was like a Lydia without a kitty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The closest she had to a kitty was her friend who she wrote all these letters to, Margaret Mercer Elphinstone, which is why we know all of this because she wrote all this stuff to her bestie. So after about 6 weeks, her governess tried to end the courtship because it's one thing for like for a prince for a young man to have sort of like a dalliance with an actress or whatever, but like if Charlotte became pregnant, like that fucks up everything really because she's the heir to the throne and like you kind of can't hide that. Um so anyway, so her governess tried to end this and Charlotte refused. Obviously, like no one's gonna tell her what, like no one puts baby in a corner is like her motto of life. Her mother, Caroline, who's just trying to be like, who's like so not involved in her daughter's life, but loves and supports her daughter. Caroline is just like, I will support this match. Like, you want to be with this guy, I will help you. You can use my rooms to meet with him. Like, which is
Okay. Okay. And
not,
how much of that is like being the permissive parent in juxtaposition to the authoritarian parent, like wanting to be the cool mom?
mhm.
Because this was objectively not a good idea.
No, no, this was not the move, but Caroline was just, and I think part of it was just like, oh, your father's not letting you see this boy. Well, I'll let you see this boy. Like, I'm gonna close this door and let you be alone with him in this room. Like, and these are things that Charlotte said happened. So, like, I trust her that. So, again, Caroline, instincts not always great, but her heart in the right place. So, in like, as she was just trapped in this Windsor castle, Charlotte, she found escape through reading novels, and the novels of this era were like sexy gothic novels, which is great. Um, so there was a gothic novel she read called The Sicilian Mysteries. She wrote her like book review of it was most interesting. It is in 5 volumes full of mystery and remarkably well worked up. So I picture her like being on Goodreads, writing about her books, the books she reads. She also, Jane Austen was writing at exactly this time. And she was a huge fan of Jane Austen, who at that point no one knew her real name. It was just like by a lady. But she loved these books. Actually, her father also loved these books. The one good thing he ever did was he supported Jane Austen. And I find this really interesting. She read Sense and Sensibility, like the new bestseller, and she related to Marianne, who's not like the heroine of Sense and Sensibility. Like Eleanor is like the sense, right? And like the Emma Thompson in the movie. Like that's kind of the character that the readers are sort of meant to sympathize with, but she sympathizes with Marianne, who's kind of like the Lydia Bennet in this story.
She's not as bad as Lydia. I have to just stand up
No,
for
no.
Marianne on that one.
Oh, nothing against Marianne as well. Like that's who I relate to in the story as well. So what Charlotte wrote was, I think Marianne and me are very like in disposition. That certainly I am not so good. The same imprudence, however, remain. So I just find it really interesting that Marianne is like a very passionate, sort of impulsive person, and Charlotte was like, oh, finally a person like me in a book. Like it kind of tells you something about her that that's the character she related to. Although she felt like, oh, I'm not as good as Marianne though. Like Charlotte, oh, the way she was raised to just like hate herself. So Charlotte, as I said, like she got sick often in this castle because the castle was cold and damp. She had chronic headaches and colds. And so her mother was like, can I visit her? Like they hadn't been able to see each other for a really long time. But George IV would not allow it because after this, the fallout of this adultery trial was basically Charlotte was being kept from her mother because the royals were saying like Caroline is a bad influence, like we can't have you around Charlotte, where it's just like Charlotte's reading these novels, man. Like read this like that's where she's learning all these things. But Charlotte was still like secretly writing letters with her mother, even though she was forbidden to. They had like servants in both households who would secretly send the letters back and forth, which is cute and touching. But eventually, George IV really wanted to get Charlotte to not care about her mother anymore. So he shared evidence from the adultery trial with her to be like, this is what your mother allegedly did. Like, look at all these shocking things she did. Until this point, she'd been shielded from the details of the trial. He shared the evidence in the newspapers and then shares those newspapers with Charlotte, is what happened. So she wrote, the publication of things I was wholly ignorant of before really came upon me with such a blow, and it staggered me so terribly that I shall not ever recover from it. The horror of the knowledge of the whole can never make those feelings ever return again that might have allowed influence. So basically, what she's saying is just like, I had no idea. These were the things my mother had been accused of. Like,
Okay, but what was she actually accused of? Because I feel like cheating on her dad, who she knows is an
mhm.
asshole, is not something that she would have held against Caroline. So what exactly was she so horrified by?
I don't know how much of the adultery stuff she would have known happened at all. So it wasn't necessarily just like, oh, your mother maybe had an affair. It's like, and I do want to say in defense of Caroline of Brunswick that this whole investigation was like fake and it was a lot of fake evidence and it was a lot of lies with kernels of truth. Caroline of Brunswick was a very flirtatious person, and there was a lot of spies around her who would exaggerate what they saw to tell George IV to make her sound bad. So it's like, oh, I saw her walking with this guy, turns into like, I assumed that she then had his illegitimate child. And that's why she was never found guilty of adultery, Caroline of Brunswick. There wasn't actually any evidence. So I think what shocked Charlotte the most was probably I mentioned that Caroline of Brunswick took in these like orphans to like school them. Is there were allegations as those were secretly her own children, that she had been having so many affairs with so many men, that she'd given birth to these children and was raising them. And so I think Charlotte was maybe horrified by the thought that those children were her half siblings, that her mother had secretly been having other children. I think that would have been maybe what horrified her as evidence of just sort of a licentious lifestyle or something. But even that, so like she wrote, oh my gosh, like I was so shocked by these revelations I read about my mother. But she still felt badly for her mother. Like the whole plan of this, like her father wanted her to just be like, oh my God, my mother is such a horrible monster. I don't want to see her anymore. But it just made her feel even more sympathetic towards her because she felt badly. Because when all this was published, Caroline of Brunswick was ostracized from society because to you and me, it's like, oh my gosh, like a woman who had been separated for 10 years, like maybe like had an affair with a man, okay. But to them, if you're the Princess of Wales and you have an affair with somebody, then that's like kind of treason. Like it was very shocking, these allegations to the people at the time. So Caroline was separated from society, but she was a very social person like Charlotte was, and Charlotte felt badly for her because now she was being sort of isolated, like Charlotte was in a castle. She was kind of horrified by what she learned about her mother, but she's glad to know the truth and ultimately still felt badly for her mother for being treated like this by the royal family.
So even though it was probably not true, she believed it.
Yeah, yeah. There's two, especially two of the children that Caroline was raising. Charlotte absolutely believed that these were Caroline's own children. And that just shows like how infrequently she saw her mother, that she thought that her mother could have been pregnant, given birth, had children. And Charlotte, like that Charlotte was away from her mother so often that this could have happened without her realizing. And I think part of it is that the fact that the people that Caroline was alleged to have had the affairs with were not royals. They were not aristocrats. They were like a painter or like a sea captain. And I think that was also very shocking. Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the idea that, this Lydia Bennet type figure who's boy crazy in her own right and whose
Hmm.
mom let her like just be locked into a room alone with a guy. I'm just trying to reconcile that with someone who would be like scandalized by this, and I'm just wondering how much
Yeah.
of it is the idea that her mother, who she never gets to see, might be secretly raising other children. Like how much of it might be sort of like a sibling jealousy type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Or also just the thing that happens to a lot of people when one day you realize your parents are humans, your parents have sexuality, like that can be appalling on its own. And this is sort of just like is not just like realizing like your mother's a sexual being, but like she maybe had these secret other children that she's been raising, and the whole country is talking about it. Like,
Well, especially because as like unlike most people who have to suddenly discover their parent is a sexual being, she legitimately has been told they only like as far as she knows, her mother has only ever had sex once.
yeah, yeah,
Which we joke
yeah.
about, but like she genuinely had reason to believe that that was true.
So it's just, and also she's whatever, like 16 years old, like lots of reasons of her to feel shocked about this, but also just like the fact that it would have been presented to her by her father in this very manipulative way. Like, look at how terrible, who's been trying to make her hate her mother for years.
Like that's another reason that I sort of have trouble reconciling the idea that she believed all this is like she knows what her dad is like, both as a person, but also like they've both been talking trash about each other to her whole life. And
hmm
so I'm kind of like, come on, are you really believing this?
I don't know. I wonder if it's also part of like I'm just thinking people, not even people I know, but just like reality TV I watched. But like if you're siding with one parent and it's so hard and you're struggling, if Charlotte could have felt like if I side with my dad, maybe my life's going to get easier. So if I allow myself to believe that my mother is this horrible person, then maybe life will be easier for me with my dad or something. I don't know. She was really struggling with it and like we can't know what was in her heart. And also it's like 18, 12. Like 16-year-olds don't have a lot. Like therapy doesn't exist. Again, just like she's struggling with a lot.
Well, and spoiler, things did not get better.
No, so it's like again, like the parallels of like Snow White or something, where it's just like she keeps being like this young woman who's lovely, who's popular, and her dad is not, and he just keeps being more and more mad about it. So when she's about to turn 17, her governess resigned, largely because the governess also had to stay in Windsor Castle, this like drafty, depressing, insane house of madness. And the governess was just like, I'm out. Like, I don't want this job anymore. She's 17. She doesn't need a governess. And Charlotte agreed. Like, she was 16, about to turn 17. And she hoped, she wrote, like, other young people of my age who ceased to have governesses at 17. So she wanted to begin having a household with ladies in waiting, as other people of that age did. It was called the Plan of Prolonged Infancy, was what her father called it, to keep treating her like a child forever. So he hired a new governess for her because he wanted to keep treating her like a child because he's an abusive, manipulative person and he doesn't want her to have any independence at all because as much as his whole family has been trying her whole life to just like crush her independent spirit, like it's still there. Like they can't mold her into this like quiet, meek person that they can manipulate. He hired a new governess. She announced that I am not going to listen to her at all. If you hire a new governess, like, fuck that. Like, I'm just going to keep doing what I want. So then she got a lecture from Queen Charlotte about you have to do what you're told. Like, and this is like every girl in this era had to do what they were told by a male relative. But she especially had to because her male relative was the Prince of Wales. So, like, they're supposed to demonstrate the whole thing about the royalty is like there's sort of this paternal figure for the whole country, and you're supposed to do what the king says. So, like if the Prince of Wales' own daughter doesn't do that, then that doesn't bode well for like the whole country not revolting against the monarchy. Anyway, so her father came, he yelled at her. She was brought before like a panel of disapproving adults. So it was like her dad, Queen Charlotte, the High Chancellor of England, and they just yelled at her. Her dad said, as long as I live, you shall never have an establishment unless you marry. So she's like, got it. That's okay. The way to get, like so many people in like abusive controlling households, like the way to get out of this is to marry somebody, anybody. Like that's the only way I can get out of this. Great. So she's legally bound to do whatever he told her what to do. And apparently during this lecture, people who were there reported like she maintained her composure during the whole, remember she has this stammer that comes out when she's upset and stuff, but she stayed strong. But then afterwards she burst into tears. But she did write to her bestie that she was still not beat, that can't bring me down. Although this was the end of her quest to try to not have a governess. She's like, clearly that is not going to happen. And she kind of pivoted at this point to be like, let's get me married then. Like, that's how I'm going to get independence. Fine. That's what I'll do.
So you've referred to her bestie, Margaret, a few times. How did she have this long, close friendship if she was kept so isolated?
So Margaret Mercer Elphinstone, and she actually went by Mercer, which is a cool name for a girl, I think. So Mercer they had been, I think, put together for like play dates as children and they really hit it off. And then when at some point, at various points, like they were separated because her family was like, oh, we can't let her have friends. But they kept in touch. They were like pen pals. Like, and for a while, they were forbidden to write from each other, but they still secretly wrote to each other. So it was a really devoted friendship that they had. And like, thank goodness, like at least like the letters that exist because Mercer saved them. There's a point in the story where people were trying to get her to destroy them, but she didn't. Mercer was an interesting person who I could also do an episode about. But the letters are almost like Charlotte's journal because she was so vulnerable in them. She was so honest in them. Just all the jokes she's making and stuff. So they had become friends in person. George IV tried to separate them because they thought like Mercer's not a good influence or something because she's like a spirited, independent-minded person. But they were secret pen pals and then just maintaining a correspondence basically her whole life. Thank God. Thank God. She needs a friend. This girl needed a friend.
Okay, so back to the I will solve all my problems by getting married plan.
Yeah. So her household, like there's still people around her. So technically, so she had a governess, but the people who were around, like specifically, so a woman called Miss Cornelia Knight, who is a spinster in her 50s, joined the household and she and Charlotte got along right away. Like she was just like, oh, this person doesn't need a governess. Like Charlotte is like an independent person and I'm gonna like help her thrive. So Charlotte gave her a nickname, which is how you know she likes somebody. She called her Chevalier, which is the French word for knight, because she's called Miss Knight. She was well traveled, she was well read. So like a really interesting person because Charlotte was dying to like travel and see the world and like talk about books and stuff. So Miss Knight had said that she accepted the position because she wanted to assist in rescuing a noble young person from surrounding persecution. And she wanted to help like train Charlotte to be ready to become like the best queen she could possibly be. So she was there for all of the best reasons, and the two of them actually got along and she respected her. Um, and so Charlotte was able to leave Windsor Castle finally. She's living in a place in London called Warwick House. And yeah, so but Miss Knight, like I love the introduction of Miss Knight. Like we talked about Mercer, her friend. So like she could get support that way by writing letters. But Miss Knight was on the scene, seeing what was happening and just being like, I'm gonna help. Like this is fucked up and I'm gonna help. So at this point, though, I mean, there's also lots more repressive forces around her. So she was sent a companion. The Duchess of Leeds' 15-year-old daughter, Lady Catherine Osborne, and her governess were sent to live with Charlotte as companions. And Charlotte and Miss Knight immediately were like, oh, she's here to spy on me. Like, this person has been brought in to spy on me. And Catherine was like she's not stealth. Like she would just like loiter outside of rooms, eavesdropping all the time. Like she was not good at being a spy. So Charlotte just became so tired of like this spying that she pulled a prank on her, which I will describe in Charlotte's own words. I took courage, walked on with her to the water closet where I stopped and finding the window open and very cold, contrived before she was aware to push her in and lock it, keeping her very agreeably for a quarter of an hour, consoling her with the assurance it could only be there she wanted to go every evening. The young lady's dismay was not small, and her assurances through the door very amusing. So basically, she trapped her in the bathroom for half an hour. Is a hilarious prank. And I think also, like, it's sort of a miniature version of some stuff that happens with Caroline of Brunswick that I get into in my book. But like, there were spies sent to spy on Caroline of Brunswick, and there were also bad spies. And so Caroline would make sure she's overheard saying things that were not true, and then the spies would carry that on. So it's kind of Charlotte just like has the same instinct of like, let's just mess around with this spy, basically.
I just feel like the incompetence is the worst part.
Hmm. Well, and just like under what's the word? Like just not realize underestimating Charlotte, like not realizing that she's actually really smart and can figure out that she's being spied on. Like I think that this person was brought in to try and get Charlotte to be like, oh, I'm in love with this person and I'm secretly writing letters to this person. So like, but she never took her into her confidence and never revealed anything damaging. So eventually things got worse with between her and her father, where she started ignore well, she was living, it wasn't her own household. Like she wasn't able to like have ladies in waiting, but she was living in a house where she had some measure of some power. And so she started ignoring invitations to go and visit her father. She wasn't able to just be like, thanks, but no thanks. But she'd be like, oh no, I'm sick. Like, and just wouldn't go. Eventually, but this is partially because she didn't want to be seen in public while her mother was still under suspicion because the whole adultery trial stuff was still going on. But then eventually, rumors spread about that her cousin, her sort of cousin, previous suitor, there were rumors that she was secretly pregnant. So she had to appear in public in like a form-fitting dress to be like, hey, look, I'm not pregnant. Thanks, everybody. So she went, there's this place called Hyde Park that is still a place in London, but at that time it was sort of like there's two paths and people would like people do on the road. I don't know if they do where you are in Australia, but like people just drive along the main drag slowly, like to see and be seen, where it's just like young people. Like you just kind of drive along and it's like, who's here? It's like you just hang out on the street. So in Hyde Park, you would ride your carriage like an open carriage in one direction, and there's people riding carriages in the other direction, and just kind of like, who's here today? Like, who's going to be in Hyde Park today? And there's like practically bleachers so that the public could watch and like, who's going to be here today? Like, sort of in person paparazzi, sort of. Anyway, so she went to Hyde Park just to be like, do, look at me, I'm not pregnant, and just sort of like displayed herself. But everyone's just like, oh my God, it's her. And like, they cheered. Like, she's still beloved by everybody. And during one of these little visits, in Hyde Park, she happened to be going down one way in her carriage, and her mother was going the other way in her carriage by coincidence, and they hadn't been able to talk for months. So they're able to like chat briefly. And all the in-person paparazzi saw this. So like it was reported on, like Charlotte talked to her mom, and she went right to her dad because her new plan is like be the perfect princess so I can get married, but he has to give permission. So she went to her dad to be like, hey, I did see Caroline of Brunswick, my mother, but we just chatted for a minute and we didn't plan it. And please don't be mad at me, etc.
Because she knows that whatever other people report is gonna be worse than the truth.
Exactly. And she had to kind of like get ahead of it to be like, I'm not hiding this from you. I didn't secretly meet with her. Like nothing untoward is going on. But yeah, as long as she was under her father's control, she would have to continue fighting for every small privilege. And so again, like her plan is just like, I'm going to find a husband because that's the way, like it feels counterintuitive to us in today's society, maybe. Like that's how you get independence. But in this situation, and there are definitely families who I know where if you have a really controlling father, the only way to get out of that is to the Duggars, for instance. It's like the only way for those daughters to get out of that household were to get married. Where it's like, so it's funny to think like that's freedom for you, but like in a really patriarchal system like this, it is. And so that's what she planned to do.
All right, so tell us about the options that came her way. God help her.
Okay. So, she had read Jane Austen by this point. So at this point, she's channeling like Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice. She's like, I'm not looking for romance. Like, she's a really dreamy romantic person, but she's like, I'm not looking for romance at this point. I just want a practical husband so I can have independence. And my one qualification is like, he has to be nice. Like, is this a nice person? Like, she saw the nightmare of her parents' marriage. And she's just like, I need to escape this by getting married, but it has to be a nice person. And so she wasn't really able because she's being kept away still from balls and things. She couldn't like meet various different people. Like most people she met were her relatives at dinner parties. So one of her first options was her father's cousin, the 37-year-old Prince William Frederick, Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh, aka the cheese, um, because Gloucester is famous for its cheese. So anyway, he's 37. What is she by this point? Like 16, 17. So he's her first cousin once removed. And frankly, not a great option, partially because had already secretly gotten married, like everybody had.
All the men had.
All the men, all the women trapped in the convent, all the men, secret marriages. Um, but also he would like her dad didn't really like him. Like she probably wouldn't get permission for this, but like did she even really want him? But anyway, so he noticed her dad noticed her talking to the cheese at one point and like sent someone over to break it up because George IV did not like the cheese. I don't know if she ever really considered him, but it's just kind of like who you look around a room that's full of like your uncles and your second cousin once removed, you're like, I have to marry one of these guys. Who's the least related to me? Him, great. The cheese, let's do it. But anyway, she another option that was more of a romantic pick was 23-year-old William Spencer, who is the Duke of Devonshire, whose mother you might have heard of, Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire from the Keira Knightley movie, The Duchess. She was like it girl of like 20 years prior to this. So he's kind of like it boy. It's sort of, second generation. It's kind of like what I'm picturing is like Patrick Schwarzenegger, like a Nepo baby of like the it girl. It's like, oh, it's like Victoria Beckham's son. So she was sort of like maybe thinking about him, but there's a lot of people in the story. It wasn't, these were all kind of the people she was rumored to maybe be considering. We don't know who she really was considering. So while she was kind of trying to like choose a husband who was nice for her, these are two options, the cheese, um, this other guy, Victoria Beckham's son. And then meanwhile, her father was like, what I need to do is find a husband for her that will mean that she leaves the country because she's so popular and I want to be more popular. So I have to send her away somewhere. So he wanted to, and this is like, so Caroline of Brunswick, her mother has like, she was from Brunswick, she's from Germany and had come to England to marry him. Like the same way that the other Hanover wives mostly had. Like it was usual for a woman to go to the country where her husband was from. So he's like, great, let's find her husband not in this country, which leads us to the Principality of Orange, which is in what I think it's now in like what is southern France. And this had been part of the Netherlands. So basically, Orange had been taken over by Napoleon, but it was newly independent. Charlotte was on the marriage market and there was a prince there. And so they wanted to for right, like this is what you would imagine out of for a royal princess. It's like the dads are going to figure out an alliance-based marriage. Like this is the same from like the medieval times. Like who do we want to ally with? So the United Netherlands and the United Kingdom. So William was the 23-year-old Dutch crown prince. Charlotte, not a fan of this plan. She started calling him the little hero because he had fought in the Napoleonic Wars, allegedly. I
He's
think
23. How much of a veteran can he be?
not exactly, exactly. So it's like a killer nickname. Oh, the little hero. So her dad really wanted her. Well, he wanted to get her out of the country and also make this like alliance. She did not want to marry some random person. And I think we should discuss why, if she was the future queen of England, they would even be talking about her leaving the country because this is,
Yeah, that's the really weird thing because usually when we're talking about marrying a princess off, it's because she's not the heir to your own throne. This doesn't make any
yeah.
sense. He is so incompetent.
George the Fourth just really wanted to get rid of her. And I guess the plan would have been something like, um, I don't know, because I guess when they were married, maybe the plan was that William would become king of the United Netherlands and the United Kingdom, and maybe they would both come over and like co-rule, or maybe they would rule from, I don't, it's not a good plan as far as I understand it, but
I,
he was not a person who came up with good plans, George the Fourth.
I don't know that there really was a plan beyond maybe if I get her out of the country, people will actually like me, which, again, so dumb.
I will say, not in his defense, but just by way of explanation, that George the Fourth had been dosing himself with opium by this point for like 25 years, and also a lot of cherry brandy on the daily. So he was constantly drunk and high, which
All right,
could be why
yeah, that
he makes
tracks.
some weird choices. Yeah. So, and he was doing both of those things under advice of doctors because, again, it was olden days and it's more fun than leeches. So he wanted this match to happen. Charlotte was just like, no, like, I don't want to marry this person I've never met. Anyway, so with her bestie, Mercer. So this is like Mercer is like clutch. Like she's your wingman. Like she's there for her, like ride or die. I'm so grateful that she exists in this story. So they contacted some of the politicians just to clarify, like, what, like, can Charlotte be forced into this marriage or not? And so the politicians were like, she's obliged to live under her father's authority, but could not be legally forced into a marriage that she does not want. So this advisor said, like, she should ask for a reasonable delay, sort of like a gap year, because she had been so isolated for so long. It's like, can I just have a year to like think about this instead of going from like nursery to marriage? And during that year, like, she would hopefully find a way to get out of it. During this time, William of Orange arrived in England and he was brought for a meeting with Charlotte. And basically, she was told, like, okay, you want to meet him? You can meet him. Like, in 5 minutes, decide do you want to marry him or not, which is not undissimilar to some reality dating shows. And so she met him and she's like, okay, well, he seems like in 5 minutes, okay, I guess. And so her father was like, great, the marriage is announced. And it was like revealed to everybody, and everyone's excited. It's like, oh my God, a royal wedding. Like, we're so excited. Like, the country's little sister is getting married. But 4 days after this 5 minute meeting, she learned, and her father had not told her this, but the little hero told her this, that part of the marriage negotiation was she would be expected to spend 6 months a year with him in Orange. And she didn't know that. And her father knew that she would not like that. And that's why her father hadn't told her that. So she didn't want to go there. She saw like how he had manipulated her into accepting this marriage. But like, it had been announced, like the same way her parents, their marriage was announced. They met, they hated each other, but they had to go through with it. And she's just like, I can't get out of this marriage. Like, this has been announced, but this is a nightmare. And this is not the independence I wanted. She's like, this marriage is happening. And so part of her is like, how can I get out of this? And part of her is like, okay, if this is happening, how can I make this happen as smoothly as possible? And that other part, the issue is like, she had sent Mercer letters during her like sort of courtship with General Hesse talking about it. And she's just like, these cannot be made public. No one can ever know that I like had this fling with this guy, that my mother locked us in this room together. And it's all written in these diary style letters to General Hesse, like love letters. So she's like, Mercer, I need you to track down General Hesse, find these letters and destroy them, basically.
It sounds like an
But
episode of Drunk History.
well, and this is where Mercer's just like, best friend of the year. She's like, would love to, but it turns out General Hesse is like on active service. Like, he's an army soldier, and it's just like not sure where he is. But we'll try to track him down to try and get, because basically Charlotte is like, if these letters are found, like, it'll ruin my reputation. Like, it's just like this sort of personal information. Like, my father will be mad at me. Like, it might wreck the marriage, but not in a way that would be beneficial to her as well. She has a new advisor at this point who is a lawyer called Henry Broome, who is one of Caroline of Brunswick's allies. He's a lawyer, and he's the sort of person who he's like out for himself, but can be useful if what's good for him is also good for you, sort of person. And so he was like, okay, what we need to do is like let the public know that you're being forced into this marriage against your will, because the public sentiment could maybe change your father's mind. And he was very canny with that. And he also used that in the Caroline of Brunswick stuff. Like, it's the first sort of like time public relations was used in this way, was in this era, to try to like, if everyone in England is against this, then maybe that'll put enough pressure on them to let you out of this. So Charlotte requested a copy of the marriage contract. She wanted to rework it so she didn't have to be like Persephone and like half the year in Holland, half the year in England. Her father was like, this is insubordination. This was your idea in the first place to marry this guy. Like,
What?
he's drunk and high, and what's he talking about? But meanwhile, the cool people of the Netherlands were like, yeah, that's fine. Like, we can amend this document. So they added a clause saying she could not be removed from England without her consent.
And so, because everyone has the same name, and I mean, thank
Mhm.
God for the nicknames, because that's actually very helpful. I wonder if that's
Thank you,
why.
Charlotte. Yeah.
That's that's why she had to give everyone a nickname. But so we had William Frederick and William Spencer, and now we've got a Frederick William. So
hmm
tell us about this Prussian prince.
So he's 35 years old. And not sure how this courtship began, but we do know that it continued on in letter form. There's so many letters in this story, which is funny because so many of the novels that Charlotte would have been reading, like at this time, that was the trend of novels, were as though they were collections of letters back and forth between people. Like if you've read Dracula, which is from like several decades later. So it's just funny that this is like a drama unfolding in letters, which just like the books she read. Anyway, so F, we're just gonna call him F, the Prussian prince. So Miss Knight, remember, she's still on the scene helping out. She helped arrange secret meetings between these two. So this was like Charlotte's secret sort of choice, but even though she was, oh no, I remember where they met. They met because there was this delegation from Prussia came for like events in London. And there would have been like a ball or a dinner party that Charlotte was allowed to go to. And that's where she met F. But in the entourage is Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, who is this kind of quiet, shy, handsome guy who also Charlotte noticed a little bit on the scene. But she and F are like having her latest. She loves a man in uniform. She loves a man called Friedrich or William. Those are the only names men have. Anyway, so one of the reasons why she wanted to stay in England was to support her mother because she knew that nobody else was. And she knew that her mother was, at this point, Caroline of Brunswick is just like, she's isolated, she's ostracized, she's very unhappy, and very few people on her side. So, and because of, even though they've been separated so much, like there is this maternal bond between Charlotte and her mother. And so she's like, I can't leave for 6 months of the year. Like my mother needs me here. So, citing concern for her mother, she broke off the engagement. She did it. Like she formally said, like, I am not going to marry this orange guy. Like this is not happening. And then her father was like, great, well then you're going to be stuck in the Grand Convent and like forever. I don't know. And then Charlotte ran away. And this is such a cool thing she did. So she was commanded to return to Windsor Castle and she ran. So she's living in her house, Warwick House in London, and she ran out a back entrance. And this is at a time, so taxis did not exist, but what there were called hackneys, which are like a carriage that is painted yellow, like taxis often are now. And you truly, it was the taxi of the era, oldie time taxi. And they could take you to where you want to go if you don't have a carriage. And so this is the first instance of a royal taking a taxi by themselves because she went out and she's just like, I'm going to hail a hackney. Then she's like, wait, I don't know how to do that. I'm a princess and I've never been on my own before. But she looked in distress and a man nearby was like, do you need help? She's like, can you hail me a hackney, please? And so he did. And she went to her mother's house in London, but her mother was not in her house in London. Her mother was in one of her other homes. Anyway, so eventually she's just like, I've run away and here's what's happening. So she had a messenger send word to her mother. Her mother like started traveling in from where she was in Greenwich. Henry Broome shows up, the like ambitious lawyer. So various advisors come, but then other people find out that she's there. So like her father sends people. Broome later describes Charlotte behaving like a bird set loose from its cage because she had done this crazy thing. Like she actually ran away from home. And she and her mother were having a nice time. Like they were just like, let's order food, let's have a nice time. And then as sort of other people came, like you remember her old tutor, the great Up, he showed up, and then it's like, oh, this guy's at the door. And then Caroline and Charlotte they were having fun being like, make him wait. This person can come in. Like they were just having fun, not letting people in. Basically, Mercer shows up as well. Miss Knight shows up with a letter from F. So it's just like the climactic drama of this all, like all the characters of this story are all in this house together. Eventually, so Henry Broome is trying to be like, why did you run away? Like, I need to understand so I can figure out how to help you. And she just said, I could not bear any longer the treatment that I was met with. And so she just like is spilling everything. She's like, I've been, they're trying to keep me like an infant. They're making me marry this person. He's going to trap me away in this like ghost castle. But basically everyone there was like, okay, this is like fun for a night, but you have to go back to your father. Like you're the heir to the throne. You can't, like, there's no other way out of this for you. She would not budge. Eventually, she was convinced to leave by Broome, who was just like, okay, look out the window. That's Hyde Park. So imagine like they've been there since, I don't know, 6 p.m. until like 3 a.m. the next day, like just this adventure happening. And he's like, okay, daylight is going to happen soon. And there's going to be a by-election. So there's going to be a bunch of people out there in Hyde Park to come and vote. if they see you in distress and hear that you're in trouble, then they maybe riot. In that riot, people might die. And do you want that to be your legacy as the Queen of England? That you cause this riot and death? And maybe just because it's late at night and you're tired, she's just like, okay, fine. Like, this finally convinced her. And so, but first she wrote an official document stating she did not agree to marry William of Orange. And if such a marriage were announced, it was against her will. And then everyone there signed it, like the lawyers. Some of the princes were there as well, like not her dad, but some of her uncles. Like everyone signed it. Caroline signed it, just being like, yes, we all witnessed this. She does not consent to this marriage. And so then she was sent back. And shortly after that, like not the same day, but like within a few weeks, her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, revealed to her that she was going to be leaving England. Um, and the reasons why Caroline was leaving England, one of them was because she knew that her being there was getting in the way of Charlotte making decisions and choosing what to do. So it's kind of like helping her daughter by leaving. And she's like, I'm going to go back to the continent. And then once you're queen, I'll come back to England, basically, was their agreement. And so they bid farewell to each other at that point. And so having sort of like flexed her muscle, like having had some independence, Charlotte is like, okay, like things went her way for once. Like she was able to get out of this match. She has this paperwork signed. Like she can't be forced to marry this person. She's not going to go to Orange. Um, and she had decided that she's going to choose her own husband. And who she had chosen at this point was not F, the hot Russian prince, but the guy from his entourage, Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, who she called the Leo, which feels very astrological to me. But he was nice, he was kind, he was handsome, he was similar age, and also he was the younger son of a king. So if they got married, she wouldn't have to go to his country. He would come to her country because she outranked him. And so, in a welcome change for the family's convoluted gene pool, they were barely related to each other at all. They were related slightly, but not as much as the cheese, for instance.
That is always an
It,
issue with the Europeans.
it really is. And they have so many health problems. Like, you need to get the new DNA in there just for like longevity of health. Anyway, so she's like, I want to marry the Leo, but she knew she couldn't just tell her dad that. So what she did is for the next 2 years, she was perfect. She behaved like the perfect heir to the throne, the perfect like little princess. Like she didn't run away, she didn't talk back. Like she behaved perfectly well because she's like, if I can do this, this is how I can get my father to agree to this. And so she and the Leo, again, like they fell in love through letters, because he was back in Saxe-Coburg, which is like Germany now. So they were for 2 years just like writing letters back and forth, being like very demure, very mindful. And eventually her father was like, okay, you've been so good, like you can marry this guy, the Leo. Everyone was so excited about this wedding because she's like, they'd cheer, like they'd loved her whole life. Like they saw her through this broken engagement. Like they knew she'd been kept away in these castles. Like she's just the heroine of the nation. And they're so excited she's marrying someone that she chose. They got married at her father's house, Carlton House. And the Leo went over there first before the ceremony for a dinner, and he was almost crushed by crowds because they were so excited to see him because they were just like, oh, here's the guy who like loves our princess, and he's gonna like everyone just like young, like a royal marriage is still, I think, really exciting to a lot of people. And this is just like these, she's choosing a nice person to marry, and everyone's just happy about it. One of the contemporary diarists of the time, well, they got married. And then this person wrote, Princess Charlotte is happy and contented. They are both of them prodigiously in love, he with his wife and she with her husband, and freedom. Because now that she was married, she got to have her own household. She got to, for the first time, it's like choose her own furniture. Like, what color do you want to paint this room? Like, she got to be independent for the first time in her life, and the marriage had allowed her that. And he was nice. So it's kind of like win-win for her. She wrote to Mercer, she called him the perfection of a lover. And so they lived together in their new home, which was called Claremont House. A few months after the marriage, she did have a miscarriage. And although she was at this point, like she was often forbidden from writing to her mother, who is now in Italy, like she and Caroline wrote to each other as much as they could in secret during this time. Because this is where she like wants the support of a mother, like going through a miscarriage and stuff. And like she wanted to reach out to her and she did.
I feel like this is why you should never trust any story where the happy ending is, and then she got married to a guy she
Mm-hmm.
loved, because, yeah, she did not have Like she finally got what was supposed to be her happy ending. And as we mentioned, anyone who's seen, like, well, as you spoiled at the very beginning, she died very young.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Bridgerton Queen Charlotte series, and that's why I'm not too concerned about spoilers because I think most people who listen to history podcasts have watched that show. Episode one of Queen Charlotte, A Bridgerton Story, is the death of Princess Charlotte. And like everyone realized, like, oh shit, there's no heirs anymore. Because just so you know, during this whole time, none of the other brothers had legitimate children in these last 20 years. Because she got married when she was 20. So 1 year after their marriage, when she's 21, she was pregnant again, and everyone was so excited. Like the whole thing, like it's so similar to right now when any celebrity announces a pregnancy, just like people get so happy for them. It's just like when a person is happy about being pregnant and they're a famous person, just everyone's just like the world just delights in it, really. So she's pregnant again. Everyone's so excited because she's like everybody's little sister. The pregnancy was medically complicated. So she put on a lot of weight as her pregnancy progressed, like more than is average, to the point that Queen Charlotte, who's still around, who had given birth 15 times, like looked at her and she was like, I'm no midwife, but like it seems like something concerning is going on with the amount of weight she's putting on. It was probably gestational diabetes. From my book and my own curiosity, I talked to some OBGYNs who I know. And I said, like, these are the symptoms. What do you think? And they're like, oh, yeah, no, that's gestational diabetes. Like, she was putting on too much weight, which meant the baby was getting too big. Anyway, so but the doctors at the time, because it's olden days, they're like, go on a diet, exercise more, which actually is probably what doctors still say today to a lot of people, frankly.
To be fair, if you have gestational diabetes, because I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and so my insulin's actually all messed up, so I'm technically pre-diabetic. But what I understand is if you do have gestational diabetes, there is like a specific diabetic diet that you should be following, but they wouldn't have known that. So like going on a
Exactly.
diet is not like in the correct sense is not the wrong thing to do, but what he told her was definitely not based on like the glycemic index or anything.
No, no, this is a time of leeches being the main medical intervention for every illness. So they're just like, wow, she's getting really big. Ugh. Okay. Anyway, so she went into labor on Monday, November 4th. She promised her nurse, I will neither bawl nor shriek, which is just like she's such a like people pleaser to a really sad and sweet extent. Anyway, I won't get into all the details that I learned from my doctor friends, but basically these days, if somebody has gestational diabetes, you diagnose it early and there's interventions you can use. Like you said, like there's a specific food protocol you can follow, there's medications you can do, like they're going to check your blood pressure and all these things. And almost definitely you would be induced early because the baby is going to get really, in this instance, the babies get really big. And really big babies have trouble being delivered vaginally. So she was in labor for 50 hours, largely because the baby was so big. She was also overdue. So like she like gained so much weight because of the gestational diabetes and was overdue. So the baby was too big to deliver. But this is like an era before C-sec like a C-section would have killed her in the medical terminology of this time. And they were like, she's the heir to the throne. We can't risk that, they thought. But even the use of forceps was like, they were just like, whenever we use forceps, the mother always dies. So let's not do that. And it's like, that's because you don't wash your instruments or your hands, jerks. Anyway, so their interventions were really based on like prioritizing her life.
That's not normal for this time. Like, I feel like a
No.
lot of times the doctors would be like, it's okay if she dies as long as the baby lives, assuming it's a boy.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's they because she was the heir to the throne, they really prioritized not doing any intervention that might kill her, which was just none of them knew what they were doing. I feel like so it was all men, the doctors who were all there. And they were like experienced in delivering babies. They're like the royal doctors, like they're people who had done this sort of thing before. But, comma, and I feel like a midwife, like a woman, like a folk healer, like people might have made different decisions from these dudes,
Okay,
basically.
also, point of clarification here, there hadn't been any royal babies since Charlotte herself 20 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
How experienced can they be in delivering royal babies?
Very fair point. Well, I feel like these guys are old enough. They probably delivered all 15 of Queen Charlotte's. So, yeah, anyway, the doctors are not the people you want on the scene, but also her health situation had gotten to a level that you wouldn't often see today because there would have been earlier interventions for what was going on with her. Anyway, at some point during the labor, the child died. The baby died. So she delivered after her 50-hour labor. She was presented with a 10-pound stillborn son. And what happens when like the child dies during birth is that like you start getting sepsis because that's like necrotic tissue inside the living mother. So this is what my friends are guessing happened. So anyway, so it was a son. And apparently the son, like he was so overdue and she had been so large, like it looked like a much older baby than just a newborn, basically. And it would have been a son. Anyway, so she was stoic in the face of tragedy, and she, like, the Leo was there with her for like all 50 hours. And they're like, we're young, we'll try again. And Charlotte, like, God bless her, like, she tried to comfort the nurses and maids around. Like, she's trying to comfort everybody, even though she had personally just had suffer this tragedy herself, personally. She's trying to make everyone feel better because that's what she's like. Her husband, the Leo, took an opiate and went to bed because he had been awake for 50 hours going through this like very scary medical situation. And then 3 hours later, she complained of abdominal pain and she began vomiting. And basically, she died. She died of probably the infection, maybe a pulmonary embolism. Everything contributed to this, like the gestational diabetes, the size of the child, the length of the labor, the lack of intervention, the doctors not washing their hands, the fact they didn't use forceps. Like ultimately, she had an infection, which became septic, and then she just bled to death. Um, and so she was dead. It was 1817. She was 21 years old. And they went to get the Leo, who was like passed out from like being awake for so long and like the opium. And they went to get him, and he was like, they hadn't been married. They'd been married for a year. They'd been, pen pals for 2 years. Like they knew each other pretty well, but they were still so young and they're still in like a honeymoon phase. And he was there with his friend, and Leo said to his friend, I am now quite desolate. Promise to stay with me always, he said to his friend. The public, like this was an outpouring of grief because they loved her, they adored her. She was everybody's like honorary little sister. A member of her household, Lady Charlotte Bury, wrote, a greater public calamity could not have occurred to us. Like people took this personally, like a member of their family had died because they had all been there, like from childhood till now. Like the way that people feel about Prince William or Prince Harry, it's like people saw them from being born and now they're an adult and now they have their own family. It's like you feel connected to them because you've watched them grow up. So her funeral was held at Windsor Castle, which is just like the place she hated most in the world. Sort of a bad choice, in my opinion. So many members of the public tried to attend that the ceremonial procession could not get in. Like it was so crowded full of people. Her father did not attend because he was too overcome with grief. Her mother did not attend because she was in Italy and no one told her that Charlotte had died. And what happened with that was that George IV swore he would never communicate with Caroline because he hated her so much. So even when their daughter died, he didn't write to her. And they're like, well, Leo, he can write to her, but Leopold was so overcome with grief that he didn't write to her. And so eventually somebody wrote a letter to like inform the Pope that this had happened. And then the messenger passed by Caroline's house and they're like, they had been waiting for news of the baby being delivered. And they're like, hey, messenger to the Pope, like, what news do you have? And he's like, no one told you. And that's how Caroline found out. She's not at the funeral either. People were so overcome about this. I did an episode a while ago on my podcast, Vulgar History, about Madame Tussaud, who is in England by this time. And her whole thing was like in a time before photography, in a time before TMZ and stuff. Like when there was a scandal or a news story happening, people wanted to see the faces of the people involved. And Madame Tussaud would make a waxwork of Napoleon. She'd make a waxwork of like whoever was in the news. And so she made a waxwork of Princess Charlotte laying down dead, holding a baby. And like the lineups of people who came to just like pay tribute to this waxwork just really speaks to how beloved she was. 3 months after this happened, her main doctor killed himself out of grief and guilt for feeling responsible for all of this happening. So the death of Charlotte, her child, and the doctor was referred to as the triple tragedy. Eventually, so the way that she was commemorated is that so she and her husband, Leopold, were living in this house in Claremont, and they'd just started the construction of a summer house, like a gazebo-sized little building. That would just be a place where they could go to play music and stuff. So he adapted those plans, which were already in the works, to make it into a private monument to her memory. And he eventually left England. He went to Belgium to become the king of the Belgians eventually. But he granted permission for the public to visit this mausoleum as like a place to pay their respects. So massive crowds arrived there to go and visit. Just before she died, Charlotte had been posing for a sculpture, like a bust, like of her head and shoulders. And so that was put in this mausoleum as sort of a tribute to her as well. And then, so she didn't become Queen of England because she died. Her son also died. And that's where all of George IV.'s brothers were like, we need to suddenly have some legitimate heirs because there aren't any. So they all married like young princesses. And one of them, his brother, Prince Edward, married Leopold's sister, actually, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg. And they became the parents of Queen Victoria. And that's where Queen Victoria comes from. So she was first cousins with Charlotte. Her mother was Charlotte's sister-in-law.
She was both her niece and her cousin. Because, like you were
Yeah.
saying, surprisingly, for this time, they weren't super closely related.
Yeah, but they are still related. So, when Queen Victoria became queen, she commissioned a grand memorial to Charlotte, which is like a big sort of carving, like a mural, but carved. And so this was currently it's in the Church of St. George at Windsor Castle. And then the mausoleum that they had built was demolished when, in the early 20th century, when the estate was sold to somebody else. In 2017, the National Trust had a replica of the mausoleum created just to kind of be like, this is where it was. Um, and they put a stone nearby it that said Leopold's words, "My Charlotte is gone." The replica was since removed, but that stone is still there that says, "My Charlotte is gone." And that is the ultimately sad, but in many parts funny and interesting story of Princess Charlotte, who she's one of those people who, when you look at like who is the like look at the succession of British monarchs, it's like, oh well, she would have been queen, what she wasn't. She died in childbirth. It's like that's what I knew about her before. But then it's like she was this cool, weird, spirited jokester, tomboy. Like she did these cool things. So I was really glad to learn about who she was because it just reminds me that like everybody, even if when you go to the National Portrait Gallery in London, there's a family tree or a tree of sort of showing like how did you get from the Stuarts to the Hanoverians to the Windsors? And Charlotte is not even on that, which I was just like, how dare you? But like, yeah, because she never actually became queen. Like she's such a footnote, but she's such a cool person. And that's what I find about women's history in general. Is like people are often, oh, she was the like you hear so much, oh, she died in childbirth. Where it's like, yeah, but who was she? Like, that's not the only thing she ever did.
It's also making me think of the previous episode that I did about the Hanoverians. The recurring theme was these almost queens. So starting with when the Hanoverians first came to the English throne, it was supposed to be Princess Sophia of the Palatinate, but she basically went for a walk, got rained on, got sick, and died. And so instead we got George the First. His wife, Sophia Dorothea, was like they also had drama, so she was basically locked in a castle like and never became queen because she had been a little too indiscreet with her own affairs. And so she basically got like imprisoned for life in a castle. And then George III's mother, Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, who we also see in the Bridgerton prequel series, but she never became queen because his dad,
Frederick never
Frederick,
became king. Yeah.
yeah, because another Frederick, yeah, never became king because he died before he could. So this is what I keep seeing is like these really fascinating women who never became queen. Like they were so close, but then we forget about them because they never became queen.
And then Victoria did, and she was like the queen. That it's sort of like you forget that other people almost were. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to look at. Well, and then also all these men became king and they were all dirtbag jerks. But there was so many, yeah, like the almost queens, like and other parts of history too are really interesting. It's just like, well, we know the people who were the queens because everything they did was sort of recorded, but the people who almost were, it's like, but who were they? And what, and that's where it's interesting to me to think about like Charlotte, if she had become queen, would she, and Leo, would they have been like Victoria and Albert? You know, like would they have had a whole bunch of children? Like would she have like implemented this sort of like really rigid, conservative Victorian type era on the world? Another major thing to bear in mind is that so Leopold, after this all happened, he's like, well, why do I need to stay in England? What's happening? And Belgium had just become an independent nation and they were sort of like hiring a king. So they were just sort of looking at royals all over, like, who will be the king? Like, Leopold, do you want to be the king of the Belgians? And he's like, I guess. So he moved there. And he got married again. And so he became Leopold the First, king of the Belgians. And then his son became Leopold the Second, king of the Belgians, who is like one of the history's most notorious war criminals, genocidal monsters. Like he went to the Congo and just like decimated. They're still dealing with the fallout from that now. So it's like if Charlotte hadn't died, like Victoria might not even exist because Prince Edward wouldn't have had to marry a princess. Like she would never been conceived. If she had survived, Leopold never would have gone to Belgium, and that affects the history of not just Belgium, but also the Congo and also the
I mean,
Netherlands and lots of places.
that does also to me raise questions about his parenting skills and like what kind of father he actually would have been if that's what came out of it.
Yeah, if exactly. So if he and Charlotte, like she died so early, would he have been a good husband? Like some of the writings hint that maybe he was like quite controlling actually. But and she was just so grateful to be not under her father's thumb. She was cool with it. But like if they had stayed married, how would that marriage have gone? If they'd had a bunch of children? Like, well, and even the fact that Queen Victoria and all of her children were so instrumental in like World War One, because like all those her children and her grandchildren were like the rulers of every country in Western Europe.
Yeah, like not just World War One, because she was marrying them off to like basically every royal family. And if I recall correctly, that's why you got a bunch of hemophilia, and like that's part
Yeah,
of what led to the Russian Revolution was the heir being a hemophiliac. And
yeah.
also, I have a separate episode about Queens and Revolution if you want to go listen to more about, yeah, Alexandra and like how she didn't help like when it came to like the factors leading up to the Russian Revolution. And
Her life is just so there's so many ripple effects of it.
and also when you're talking about sort of the vibes, so to speak, of like what Victorian England and therefore like all the ripple effects that that had, like just the vibes. I wonder how much of that came out of, we're talking about how infantilized and how controlled Charlotte was, but Victoria, I would say, had it even worse on that front. And it's again interesting to think about like how Charlotte responded to that treatment versus how Victoria did and how that would have shaped Charlotte's rule versus how it did shape Victoria's. But I mean this is all theoretical, but if you want to speculate.
No, and that's really interesting to think about too. Like that Victoria was also part of this like fucked up family lineage with like toxic parent-child relationships. And then she married Albert, had all these children who she kind of didn't like, and perpetuated that whole cycle of just toxic absentee parent. I don't know. So it's like, I don't know if Charlotte would have been like that or not. I don't know. Like Victoria was, on the one hand, it's like, how different could it have been? But if Charlotte didn't live, like Victoria lived a long time, that's part of, I don't know. Like I also read that because the Hanovers were so chaotic for so long, Victoria came in intentionally wanting to be like the royals are like a patriarchal force and we're like your family and you like we're like moral and we're ethical and this is how we like she really established an understanding, and she's queen for so long, that like the royal family are like they should be respected and they're kind of the moral authority and stuff. They're not, but that's how she presented them. And then that carries on through to today. Like she really sort of restored the admiration that people had for the royal family after everything that happened with the Hanovers. So I don't know, Charlotte maybe was poised to do that too because people loved her so much. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting like sliding doors thing of like what would have changed if she had survived that birth, or even if her son had survived that birth. Like what would have happened? Like the ripple effects internationally would have been really interesting, or maybe different people would have done the same things and we'd wind up in the same place we are now. I don't know.
So, from what I understand, you wanted to talk about Charlotte today because your book was too long and they made you cut her, and you just needed to tell everyone about this. But for anyone who wants to know more about Caroline and more of this petty drama, because I'm just like, how did they hate each other so much when they were
Ah.
together for such a short period of time?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if anybody wants to read about that, your book is now available for pre-sale if you want to tell us about that.
Absolutely. First, I do want to clarify that I was not told to remove the Princess Charlotte stuff from my book. I figure that out by myself when I was going through just before I submitted it. I was just like, this is way too much. I had like 3 chapters about Princess Charlotte, and I'm like, that's not what this book. I preemptively removed it before someone had to tell me to, but it left me all these beautiful notes I was able to use. So I was really happy to come here and share all of them because I want people to know about her because she's such a cool person. And yes, so she does appear quite like I would say an appropriate amount in my book. So, Rebel of the Regency, the scandal saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's uncrowned queen, is available for pre-order, and you can find out all the information about it and get all the links at rebeloftheregency.com. I had to skip over a lot of Caroline stuff to tell the Charlotte story, and the Caroline stuff is even more bananas than the Charlotte stuff. And I think it really shows. If you read the book in combination with listening to this episode, like you can kind of see how Charlotte really took after her mother, just in her stubbornness and her just like spiritedness and just her inability or unwillingness that I admire to change who she was. Like both Charlotte and her mother, Caroline of Brunswick, couldn't not be themselves. And I think that's an admirable quality for a woman then as now.
Join us next time on the Infinite Women podcast, and remember, well-behaved women rarely make history.